The sea, which has nurtured life since ancient times. The seabed, lying beneath the blue and beautiful sea, is sometimes called the last frontier. In fact, only 10% of the seabed is known to humanity, and much of it remains shrouded in mystery. The deepest ocean on Earth is the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, but until the 21st century, fewer people had reached the deepest part of the Challenger Deep than had landed on the moon. So, if we were to descend into that unexplored realm, what would we find there? And after a fall of over 10,000 meters, what would you feel? This time, the Mariana Trench. I would like to introduce what happens when you fall to the deepest part. The Mariana Trench is south of Japan. It is located to surround the eastern and southern sides of Guam, which is famous as a tourist destination. Because the lighter continental plate and the heavier oceanic plate are colliding, the heavier oceanic plate is subducting, forming the deepest trench on Earth. The deepest place here is the Challenger Deep, located on the southern side, and its depth is approximately 11,000 meters. Let's begin the descent mission to the deepest part of the Mariana Trench now. First, at a depth of 0 meters. Naturally, humans can survive here in their natural state. However, do not let your guard down. This place is more than 300 kilometers away from the nearest land. If you are in your natural state, you will eventually exhaust yourself and become seaweed debris. Or you might have a real experience of what happens if you get eaten by a shark. In shallow waters, if it's sunny, sunlight penetrates sufficiently, and photosynthesis by phytoplankton is actively occurring, then zooplankton and small fish gather in search of the phytoplankton, and since they become food for larger organisms in this area, an ecosystem based on solar energy is formed. Depending on the definition, the area where an ecosystem with phytoplankton as producers exists is called the euphotic zone, and its depth is generally considered to be from 80 meters to about 200 meters. It is believed that 90% of marine life inhabits the area from the ocean surface to a depth of 200 meters. In other words, you can enjoy various sea creatures as you descend. But in other words, from here, it becomes dark and lonely. No, never mind. Oh, as the depth increases, it seems to be getting rapidly darker. The water appears transparent, but in fact, it has the property of absorbing visible light. At a depth of 10 meters, the energy of visible light is halved, and at a depth of 100 meters, only 1% of visible light reaches. Furthermore, as it gets darker, the pressure also increases. Underwater, the pressure increases by about 1 for every 10 meters you dive. Some people might think that as long as you have an oxygen tank, you can dive deep, but that notion is shattered at just a few dozen meters deep. In order to cope with the increasing surrounding pressure, the breathing gas must also be pressurized, but high-pressure nitrogen acts like an anesthetic on the human body. This is called nitrogen narcosis, and it is said to feel pleasantly like being drunk. You may become what is commonly known as high, laughing, forgetting that you are underwater, and potentially doing foolish things, losing self-control. So, we finally reached a depth of 200 meters, but we haven't even covered 1/50th of the distance to the seafloor. From here to a depth of 1,000 meters is called the mesopelagic zone, also known in English as the twilight zone. In other words, very little sunlight penetrates here. I hesitated to say it earlier, thinking it might be frightening, but from here it gets progressively darker. It becomes a quiet and lonely world. At a depth of 200 meters, the water temperature is almost the same as the surface, and the pressure is about 20 atmospheres. However, at a depth of 1,000 meters, the water temperature drops to 5 degrees, and the pressure increases to 100 atmospheres. Furthermore, plankton, which serves as food, also, the oxygen necessary for breathing also decreases significantly. Nevertheless, life exists even in such environments, and you might encounter fish like the blobfish adapted to the darkness, bioluminescent jellyfish, or giants. There are also many organisms that move between the mesopelagic zone and the epipelagic zone. For example, the lanternfish spends the day in the mesopelagic zone but rises to the epipelagic zone at night in search of food. This behavior plays an important role in the ecosystem by transporting organic matter to the mesopelagic zone, according to some studies. However, as we dive deeper, the number of organisms rapidly decreases. From a depth of 1,000 meters to 4,000 meters is the abyssal zone. In English, it is also called the midnight zone, and as the name suggests, no light penetrates at all. In this zone, there are no organisms that transport organic matter from foraminifera, and of course, photosynthesis is impossible. It is believed that regions deeper than the full depth layer depend on marine snow, which is organic matter falling like snow from shallower areas. Here, many organisms have evolved in ways unimaginable near the surface, such as completely abandoning vision or emitting light to lure prey. The famous anglerfish also inhabits the deep sea zone. That said, unless you are very lucky, you probably won't encounter any creatures, let alone an anglerfish. In the deep sea, conserving energy is a fundamental strategy. Oxygen concentration is low, and food may come at unpredictable times. Therefore, organisms in this area live with minimal movement. If you really want to see creatures, bringing dead fish or similar items will quickly attract many organisms. At the bottom of the deep layer, around a depth of 4,000 meters, the pressure reaches 400 atmospheres. Normally, one would narrate that this is an incredible pressure, but compared to the pressures experienced on celestial bodies, it's a breeze for the giant squid. Now, beyond a depth of 4,000 meters, the calcium carbonate that forms the shells of mollusks and crustaceans dissolves in seawater, so these organisms usually cannot inhabit this area. For the same reason, calcium-containing sediments seen in shallower seabeds are not found here, and the seabed in this area contains a lot of clay and silicon. The life in the deep sea is concentrated near the seabed where marine snow accumulates, but you won't be able to see it on this adventure. This is because the place you are heading to is even deeper into the abyss, entering the region called the ultra-deep sea layer at depths of 6,000 to 7,000 meters. In English, it is named the Hades Zone, after Hades, the king of the underworld in Greek mythology. Seas deeper than 6,000 meters are extremely rare on Earth, including the Mariana Trench. At the bottom of the abyssal deep sea body, there are several deep trenches, which serve as entrances to the underworld like ultra-deep sea layer. Even after reaching the ultra-deep sea layer, it is necessary to dive more than 4,000 meters further. In this ultra-high-pressure environment, proteins, bones, and even cell membranes no longer function properly, and below a depth of 8,500 meters, it is believed that fish cannot exist. However, surprisingly, a type of shrimp that covers its calcium carbonate shell with aluminum to prevent dissolution has been discovered, and it wouldn't be surprising if there are other creatures that defy human understanding. Finally, the bottom of the Mariana Trench. It seems we have arrived at the Challenger Deep. The depth is approximately 11,000 meters, and the pressure is in atmospheres. Also, the water temperature is degrees. No sunlight reaches here. Even in this hellish environment for humans, on the seabed, there are shrimp and sea cucumber relatives, and numerous microorganisms inhabit these areas. Life always finds a way. How was your journey to 11,000 meters below the sea? Now, please enjoy the underworld at your leisure. It's a quiet and dark deep sea, but surprisingly, it's a comfortable place where you can forget everything.